This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey, everybody, it's Rosie. Listen, you are probably going to want to listen to this conversation more than once. There are so many practical but applicable and tangible nuggets of wisdom that are just going to make teams of all sizes, organizations of all sizes better. I am talking about my conversation that I had with Matt Tait, who is the CEO at Decimal, and they are a fast growing company. And regardless of the size, like Matt is such a great example of being intentional about actually living your values, of how you go about decisions, of how you actually socialize decision making, how you show care. The culture that he's created and the growth and the success that they are having is truly admirable. And whether you are a small business, whether you are a ginormous business or anything in between, I think you can learn from what Matt is doing. And you're going to want to listen when he talks about the role of being a chief repeating officer. You want to listen for how he goes about socializing decisions. I think that's a really critical lesson that people can learn from. And really how you go about building a very intentional culture and meaningful relationships, even in a remote culture. So many good things in this conversation. Take a listen. All right. So Matt, I am super excited to have this conversation with you. And I want to just jump in because I know that you are on a trajectory of building and growing a very intentional, culture-focused company, which we're going to talk all about because I think so many people can learn from it. But it didn't come like out of the blue. It came from failure and learning, which I think so often we don't like to talk about.
Yeah.
And so I just want to jump right in and talk to me about what led up to you starting Decimal. And then we'll talk about how you've taken those lessons and how you're applying it to build a really cool people first company.
Well, for me, it's, this is my third company. And the first time I had a chance to run somebody else's business, and it did pretty well. But I wanted to run my own. And I decided to get into the restaurant marketing tech space, which is not a good idea for anybody. But that was one of those kind of good idea, bad company businesses. And it totally failed. But one of the things that I learned through both opportunities for me was that I had a problem with what I would call bookkeeping and accounting operations at both companies. First place, I tried to hire bookkeepers and controllers. That didn't go very well. Second place, I said, I'm going to hire the best accounting firms in the world that do this stuff. And that was worse. So as a true entrepreneur, I said, hey, these are problems that I've had. I asked a bunch of other people. It turns out everybody hates their bookkeeper. And it provided us with the opportunity to grow Decimal. And kind of like you mentioned, we've been very lucky to grow fast. In 4.5 years, we've gone from, 2 founding team members to 82 employees in 5 countries, 26, 27 states, and almost 700 clients. And one of the ways that we've done that, kind of like you mentioned, is really developing a good people first culture. And in order to do that, we're fully remote. We have to do it very intentionally with every aspect of our business. And one of the things I've been talking about a lot is yesterday, I got the world's greatest compliment. We have an intern, JJ, who's a student at Butler University, and I was doing his exit interview. And he was telling me, he said, one of the really good things about the company is he said, I'm going to go into school this next semester, and I'm going to be the only intern that could tell you all of the core values of the company that he just worked at. And he said, it's because you talk about the values all the time. The team members talk about the values all the time. There's a Slack channel where people give kudos and tag values. And he said, that's just one of the things that I think is so cool about Decimal is everybody knows the values, talks about the values, lives out the values. And it's one of the kind of core foundational elements that we've built at Decimal. And I told him, I said, look, and you and I've talked about this in the past of, hey, one of my jobs as CEO is I am the chief repeating officer. It is my job to state the vision, state the values, state the mission, state the strategy, and then say it over and over again so that my team says it over and over again. But that was just super cool to hear an intern say that. And I was like, dude, you have a job forever because that's a story that I'm going to get a ton of mileage off of.
You are. I love that. And the fact that, an intern recognizes that, because sometimes in some organizations, interns can be treated almost like, second class citizens, or like, the step kids or whatnot. And so that in and of itself, but that JJ recognized that is super amazing. So kudos to you for that. Like that's stellar. And I love that you talked about being the chief repeating officer, because one is, if anyone's familiar with Pat Lencioni and organizational health,
Oh,
he
yeah.
talks about that and we do a lot of this work with our clients. We help them build and nurture organizational health, but you have four disciplines, and the first is build a cohesive team. The second is you have to create clarity. So that is, why we exist, our values, who does what, all of those things. But then you have to not just communicate, but over communicate clarity, and then you have to reinforce it.
100%.
Yeah, and I think that those steps 3 and 4 are where it falls short, because they do all the work, they hire consultants, they do that, and then when it comes down to daily practices and deliberate practices, it falls short. Or you have the CEO like yourself, but like, I love that you said, but then my team members, because it's not just you as the CEO, whoever is listening, if you're a formal leader, you also have to repeat it. But I would suggest that everybody in the organization needs to be that
Oh, 100%.
repeating officer, which is super, super, super critical. So I love that so much. And so let's talk about, like, so not only are you living your values and repeating them, but you also went through a very intentional process to create them. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then where you landed?
So, what's funny is for the first year and a half of Decimal, we did not have company values. Very intentional. When you're a team of like 10, 15, 20 people, your values are everything you do together on a daily basis. Like, you have a tight knit company, you're growing fast, you're spending a lot of time together. Like, your values are what you do together on a daily basis and weekly basis. But as you start to grow, your ability, and particularly your ability as the CEO, to continue to embody leading by example becomes much harder on an incremental level. And I think that's when values become very, very important. And what we developed first and what we noticed first were key behaviors that we embodied at Decimal before values. Key behaviors of being the most responsive team you'll ever deal with, on respecting our work and making sure it's the most accurate it can be, of just treating people right. Those were behaviors that we had. And then when we had a leadership team and I said, hey guys, it's time for us. We've talked about our mission, talked about our vision for the future. It is time for us to create company values and to make them ingrained in the business from this point forward. And we went through a very detailed process on that because I said they need to be two things. They need to embody these behaviors that lead up to those values, but then they also need to be slightly aspirational. Like, they need to be our best versions of ourselves. And I said, I want to give you all some examples. We're in a team meeting, it's in Boston. And I said, hey, here are 5 companies that had really cool values. Let's look at these. I want to talk about them for 15 minutes. And they were like, these are great. Like, we have so many ideas and blah, blah, blah. I said, great. There's Enron. Here are 4 other companies that failed. Most companies put values on a wall, and that's the last thing they do with them. We will not be that company. So let's really we spent an entire couple of days literally just talking about the values. And when we came up with them, we really felt good. And we will do the right thing. We will default to transparency. We will move fast and make things better. And we will win together. And those are the 4 core values at Decimal. And we talk about them all the time. In fact, my kids, and I've got a great story that happened today. I talk to my kids who are 10, 10, and 7 about our company values because I think they're actually just good values for people to have. Um, and today we're driving kid drop off line. I drop my kids off at school every day. It's like this S shape. You kind of go around there with all their friends, and they're at the level and age where they are embarrassed by dad, and I get enjoyment out of embarrassing them. So it's,
You got to. I mean, you have to embrace that era. Yes.
Oh, I love it. So we're driving in line, and all of a sudden we see that there's this car stopped right along the side. I notice it's our neighbor, and her car died. She had gotten there early. She turned the car off. Well, battery wouldn't start. And so we stop, and I stop the whole line behind us, and I say, "Hey, two kids, hop in our car. I'll drop you off. Like your mom's stressed. Like, let me handle getting you over there." We get over there, and I'm like, you know what? I got jumper cables in the back of my car. So I go off roading over the entire front of the school lawn to get my car right up in front of hers. And I then take my kids and I walk them across the traffic line. And all three of my kids give me a hug. And my 7-year-old daughter, Charlotte, looks at me and um, she goes, "Dad, this is all people are going to talk about today. You're a hero." And right before we got out of the car, and she gave me a hug, and I'm like, this is going to get me through winter. But before they get out of the car, my kids are like, "Dad, you're busy. Like, you got to get home. You have a bunch of stuff to do. Like, you don't need to stop for Truett's mom and dad." And I'm like, yeah, I do. Doing the right thing isn't always convenient, but you have to do it. That's a lesson my kids will remember. And plus, it's all these kids at school are going to talk about is that the Tate's dad totally off-roaded in front of all of school and
Oh my God, I love it.
jumped her car. So sorry, that just happened today, and I'll like that and JJ's story are gonna just I'm gonna live off of that and eat off of that for the next couple of
You
months.
should. They're well, one, they're fantastic stories, but I think they're also such a great example. And I love that so many companies. I mean, depending on who you listen to, but they say 3 to 5 max, right, with your core values. Or people have a list of 10. But the thing, and I want to dig into this a little bit more because when you talk about it, it's one thing to get clear about them, like when you say do the right thing, and you like here, like of course I'm gonna off road and I'm gonna help this person. Of course I'm gonna do that. And where what I find where things fall apart with our clients. So we come in and maybe we've helped them articulate their purpose and their why and their values. Great. Or maybe they already have it done, but they're like, people, they're not attached to it. It's not a lived experience. And how can we help close that gap? So, whichever camp it falls into, we're always like, how do you create the system and structure to over communicate, reinforce it, and have it be a lived experience? And where I see it fall apart is they might actually have really good values that are not the loosey goosey, like integrity. What the hell is that? Everyone has that. Like, let's make it more real and tangible and unique to you. But they haven't taken the next step to actually translate them into clear behavioral anchors. Like, this is what we mean by doing the right thing. This is not what we mean. Like, this is what we mean by defaulting to transparency. This is what we mean by moving fast and making things better. And this is what we mean by winning together. So, talk to me about, you came up with your values, and then let's talk about the process you took of how you actually operationalize them and how you've made them a lived experience.
So there are a lot of aspects of that. And I'll start from the beginning. And not all of it worked. So part of it's just kind of guess and check. But one of the things that we did immediately afterwards when we came out with our values is we we did an all hands with the team and we released the values. And then we broke the team into groups of 7. And I said, hey, over the next month, I am going to meet with each group of 7 for an hour. And we are going to talk about these values, talk about what they mean to you, what they don't mean, what I think they should mean. And we did an hour-long meeting with each group of 7 because to me, that group of 5 to 7 gives you the ability to be honest about them, to really talk about them. We used that as an opportunity, recorded all the calls to get the stories and thoughts from people on the do's and don'ts of each one of the values. And that was amazing for the team that we had at the time. And then part of onboarding for all new employees is they spend a half an hour with me talking about Decimal's mission, vision, and values. And I go through all of that stuff plus the recorded do's and don'ts of each value. And we also have it documented in we use Notion, but our own place where people can go and they can see those. And so we've done that to kind of institutionalize the values. Then what we've also done is we've created a Slack channel where people give kudos. Hey, somebody did something amazing. I want you to publicly thank them. Like, we have a very thankful culture, but you have to tag a company value. What value were they demonstrating in the great thing that they did? And that was really, really important. We also separately talked about the key behaviors at Decimal, that if you do all of these, you will embody each one of the values. And so we talk about each one, and we have a spot in each all hands that we do now on a quarterly basis where we actually talk about some of the kudos and the values, and we'll give props to people. Sometimes we'll give an extra bonus to somebody, or we'll give them something special. But like, we really go out of our way to recognize when people embody Decimal's values. And individual teams, like when our ops team gets together, our revenue team gets together, they talk about values as well. And so it's part of the training that I do with our, not only my direct reports, but our director level and people managers, is I spend time with each group on a monthly basis doing trainings. And there's always a values aspect or a behaviors aspect to each training. It's not tactical. It's very much, how do you be better at embodying these, repeating these, and talking about it. So we have really tried to stitch intentionality into every aspect of the company, so that everybody knows exactly what's expected of them and what's expected of Decimal. And then we also do talk in a lot of ways about ways that I embody things and what I've done. Because I think that, like, one of the things I talk about quite heavily is all the things that I fail at. I fail a lot, and so it's easy, but it gives people permission to fail themselves and to try new things. And we also talk about doing the right thing. I publicly will fire clients who are jerks to our employees. And then we talk about that, because that's doing the right thing. And so we really do talk quite heavily every stage of the organization on the embodiment of all of that. I don't know if that answers your question, or if that was just a very long-winded statement.
No, that I love everything about that. I mean, I'm just like, yes, yes, yes. And there's several things about it. One, I want to just circle back to after you came up with them, as a leadership team, but then how you involve people, because we regularly quote Margaret Wheatley, who says people only support what they've helped to create. And there's all kinds of research on fair process and others that if we are not including people in the process, then they're more likely to show up as resistors and saboteurs. And people, change is hard enough, but people don't tend to resist change as much as they resist being changed. And so when
Oh, yeah.
so when you think about that, and we actually did this with one of our clients, we wrote about it in our Rehumanizing the Workplace book, but we actually included them all in creating basically their values and stuff, but it was through storytelling. And so what I love about what you're doing with the storytelling is, as human beings, we are wired through story. Like, you've got these great stories now, that you said you're going to get months out of, but the reality is we remember stories, and it makes us relatable to other people and experiences, even if it's not the same as our own. Like, we get that whole thing. And so one, I just want to say kudos for that approach, because one of the things that we always tell our clients when we're doing this work is that your purpose and your values act like a lighthouse. We call it the build a lighthouse principle. They
Right.
cut through the fog. They provide energy of like hope of where to go, but also clarity to ground you when there's dark and stormy waters. Like, how do I approach this situation? Do I fire this client or not? Do I have to let this person go or not? They really help bring that clarity. And what we say is that storytelling is what keeps the lighthouse illuminated. It's what keeps it alive. It keeps that emotional, it keeps that connection. And so there's a lot of organizations that are starting to build deliberate storytelling practices. Like, when their new people come on, they share a value story or whatever, whether it's in weekly meetings or like you're doing through Slack, to keep that alive in front of people. So I just want to say kudos to all of that, because that's so what the research shows and what we're doing in practice with our clients as well. And so I just think I think it's stellar. So that more than answers the question.
Well, I think there's another aspect that you kind of hit on that brought a thought to mind. One of the things that I train and talk a lot about with our team, and particularly our managers and leaders, is socializing decisions. The first time a group of people hears about a major decision should not be in a group setting. What we like to do is I ask them, hey, if you're going to make a big announcement, socialize the decision making. Talk to people beforehand, talk to them one-on-one, get their opinions, get their thoughts. Because guess what? Then in a group setting, if you say, hey, Rosie really liked this part of our decision and she and I talked about it, you're going to stand up and say, yeah, we did. And then everybody's going to say, well, if she likes it, maybe I should like it. Like, it really helps. And my COO, Michael, likes to joke. He's like, you really enjoy cheating to win. And I said, no, it's just socializing the decision making and getting people on board, getting their input. Does it necessarily change the statements? Does it change the wording of the values? No, but it can change the reaction to them and the discussion about them and the stories around them. And, you can do all of that stuff to socialize decision making early on and throughout a process. And it helps generate that buy-in, because buy-in is truly what you're talking about. And getting and maintaining it is exceptionally important for all organizations, period.
100%. And I actually love that idea of socializing decision makings for a couple reasons. One, it's not just that you're giving people an opportunity to give individual feedback before you have it in a group setting. And maybe someone doesn't like to speak up in groups, and it maybe isn't because of lack of psychological safety, it's just
Yeah,
not their comfort zone. But here's the other thing is what it just brought up for me, Matt, is that, when you think about, inclusion in the workplace, it also means recognizing that there are different learning and processing styles, and some people need more processing time. Our internal processors need to chew on things, etc., before they can come up with thoughts or opinions or meaningful input. And so often, I mean, I'm an
yeah,
extrovert, so I will, we think out loud and process out loud. But for people who are more introverted, who process internally, that stuff can disrupt them. And like, I love Susan Cain's work. I always give this to my clients who struggle with this. Is, a lot of times the extroverts in the room, virtually or in person, tend to take up the space, and others get swallowed up. And so when you're socializing ahead of time, it's also giving people a chance who need to digest it a little bit longer,
right.
need to process it a little bit longer to be able to do that, and then be able to come forward in a broader discussion with some thoughtful input that they maybe just couldn't do on the spot because that's just not how they're wired.
Yeah, and I think we have a what I would call a socialization ramp, and where we socialize before, then we make a big announcement, then we socialize after, because you want to give people with 82 people. A lot of times you can't socialize with everybody beforehand, but you want to make sure that you're able to hit everybody on that ramp. And so you provide group settings, small group settings, and one on one settings to give everybody the chance to socialize the change. And we do this not just with values, but with we're going through an organizational change and kind of the execution of work for the next evolution of our company. And we really talked about a lot of it ahead of time. We made a big announcement about it, and we talked about a lot of it afterwards, and it gets buy in throughout the process.
I love that ramp up and kind of ramp down, if you will. And here's what I will say is, even ginormous companies, you still can socialize. I think so often there are so many
Yeah,
layers of hierarchy and red tape that it's not done, and then they wonder why, it fails. I mean, you look at, depending on the stats, right? They'll say, anywhere from, 60 to 80% of change efforts fail, or, more. And a lot of it, from our perspective, a lot of times it's because they're not caring for the human element. You've done all the things on paper, there's all kinds of secret
right.
meetings. And I get that some things you can't, depending on what it is, right? There are certain things that you can only bring certain people into depending on, but for the most part, a lot of things you can start poking around and getting feedback and getting ideas. So to your point, if you are, if people who are listening are part of a large organization, it goes back to, are you including the various levels of formal leadership to be part of that process? Because if it's just relying on coming from the CEO or the marketing and communications officer, or just relied on coming from some level of
Yeah,
leadership, it's going to fall apart, because I guarantee you that that frontline supervisor who's in a warehouse or out in the field somewhere is not sitting on their emails, was not part of those meetings, doesn't know what it was, doesn't know what's expected of them. And sometimes they can either intentionally or unintentionally end up undermining what you're trying to do, because they haven't been included as part of whatever the process is, to again help people feel heard. And it's not about management by consensus, it's just about, are people being included, and is the process transparent, and is the process fair of how a decision came to be, and that feedback was in fact considered.
right.
Yeah, love that. Love it. So you said something else that I want to circle back to, because I love it so much. You talked about, you're very open about sharing failures. And my friend Kristen Hadid, wrote a whole book, Permission to Screw Up, that people should go read, and talking about failures. And I'm a big believer of that as well, because as leaders, again, formal leaders, because we believe everyone can show up as a leader, but when you have that formal leadership role, you do set the tone for the culture being a lived experience, for psychological safety, for everything. And so talk to me about, when you talk about, you're very open about like your failures. Talk to me about like how you go about doing that. Like, what's the forum? How do you, and then how does it create a space, or how do you encourage other people to also share their failures, so you can learn from it and grow?
Well, I do it in a couple of different ways. One, I love doing one on ones with people. I'll just do random one on ones with anybody in the organization. I try to give them context, like, hey, I'll Slack you. Hey, just want to catch up before I put meeting on their calendar because I find that it freaks people out if they just end up with a random CEO meeting on their calendar. That was a lesson learned, which in all hands I talked about, like, hey, just so you know, every once in a while I might put something, I just want to see how things are going. Um, but I learned I was scaring the heck out of people. So I've socialized that a little bit better. I talk about it in our all hands. Hey, what are some things that I've done that didn't work out? Or what are some things that we've done as a company that I think we need to improve upon? I ask our managers to do it. I ask our directors to do it. I talk a lot with those individual groups of leaders on what I've screwed up and where I can improve. Why I did it too, I think is also important. And then I do it with my direct reports. It's just a natural part of my transparency as a person is I can come off as an extrovert. I am not. I am very much an introvert, and I just have extrovert qualities occasionally. But I can find being extroverted all day long very draining, and I find that to be the sign of somebody who truly is an introvert. But I do like to be just transparent about who I am. It's one of the things I learned in the company that failed was I wasn't transparent. I wasn't honest about status as a business, about where we were going, about the financials of the company. And I've just found at Decimal, it's just way more freeing to just talk about all of that, talk about my struggles. I also, I've talked about this with a lot of CEOs. I think that there is a blessing and a trauma that I and a lot of CEOs have had to go through recently, which is managing through a pandemic. And one of the really great things that has come out of that is just it laid us all to bear in like the reality of our lives. You know, my wife is an amazing person. She has a way cooler career than I do. And at the time, we had kids who were like 5 and 6 and 4. So we had 3 little kids running around. We're both trying to work, and like, it was just insane. We were a mess. I just talked about that, which made it okay for my team to talk about that. And what I haven't done is remove that from the equation post pandemic. So it's just cool. I had one of our employees, super cool dude, one of our accounting managers, and he just slacked me yesterday. He's like, hey, I just want to tell you my day started bad. I got rear ended. Sent me some pictures, and I'm like, I immediately sent his manager a message, his manager's boss a message, my COO a message. I'm like, hey, just so you know, he got hit by a car. Like, let's love on him all day, make sure he's doing okay. Yeah, like that's cool. People open up, and that's like, there's no work life balance. It's all one thing, and it's much better to just be cool with that than not.
That is so fantastic on so many levels. And one is the last thing you said. Yeah, I hate the term work life balance because it assumes like, what are we like the scale? Like we always talk about work life harmony or, work life integration because, again, for so many industries, those lines get blurred and it's just here we are. Right. And so recognizing that.
Just life.
Yeah, it is life. But the other thing that I love about what you're doing is by being real, and it's also honoring your value of transparency, like, hey, here's where I screwed up. One of the things that
Yeah,
we've been doing now for, gosh, we're going on probably 2 years now, and I borrowed this from something that I actually saw from Amy Edmondson online, and she was posting from someone else, so it's like I can't even give the full attribution, but it's been so impactful for our team. Is so we do like a daily like quick check-in with our core team, and then we have longer meetings on Mondays and Fridays. So Mondays are checking in and prioritizing for the week and helping everybody kind of get straight and syncing up, et cetera. And Fridays are reflecting back on the week. And so when we reflect back on the week, we of course look at what was our peak of the week and all those things, but we do F up Fridays. And F up Fridays is what I learned from Amy. And so I go first as a leader. And so here's the thing, it's on the agenda and everyone knows it's coming. And we're like, and so people are like, well, it's not really an F up. I'm like, well, it can be a squiggle, detour, setback. Like we say F up in the product, but it doesn't have to be like massive, colossal, right? But it's like but everybody has to share what is your F up from the week and what did you learn from it? Like what, and I will tell you, and I've said this in other podcasts, but our best process improvements have come from F up Friday shares. And it's like, oh yeah, and then now because we use Slack as well, it'll be like, well, F up Friday on a Tuesday, here's what I'm taking from it, and people just start.
yeah,
But I'm telling you, it's like, ooh, okay, and that informs how we manage our calendars and how we talk to one another, and you do have to go first. as a leader. So I love all that. And the other thing I love that you did is that, that the employee that was was rear-ended, we always check in. We start all of our meetings one-on-one or group with, and I borrowed this from my training with Brene Brown, is we do a two-word check-in. How are you feeling today? And if it's a bigger group, people have to put it in
Yeah.
the chat, if we're virtual. If it's, a room, we'll go around if we happen to be in person, or, if it's a smaller group, we can also go around virtually. But you will get things like, I'm tired, or I'm worried, or this or that. And it's an opportunity then to maybe not right then and there. If it's a one on one, you'll obviously do that. But if it's a group setting, it might be, I'm going to circle back to that person. Hey, in that meeting, I want to check in with you. Or, is there anything I can do to support you today? Because in our check in, you said you were worried and, overwhelmed, or worried and anxious, or this or that. And it allows that I see you as a person, and before we get to the agenda. So I love that you're like, let's love on him, let's care for him, because so often we just kind of let that
Yeah.
stuff go, and that's not helpful.
One of the things that we started during the pandemic when it was a team of like three and an intern was, and we've carried on today, is we do one-on-ones regularly, very regularly, because we're a remote company. And so I don't have the, like, I'm walking near you and can kind of see your body language. But we ask that, hey, your first question needs to be the real, like, how are you doing today? And not just to pass you in the street, like, hey, how's it going? But like, how are you doing today? And if you get a bullshit answer, ask it again. And that's been ingrained in who we are as a business. And it's one of these things I hear a lot of people say, like, remote cultures, you can't build the connection, you can't build the culture, you can't. That's crap. It's all about being intentional, and intentionally seeing people for who they are and letting them be who they are. I told a story earlier today. We had an employee a while back in the Philippines, and her husband needed heart surgery, and she couldn't pay for it. We get benefits, we get great pay, but because of the healthcare system, it's different over there. And the team heard about this, and they started a GoFundMe campaign, and everybody donated. Her husband's doing great now. Like, that's what we did as a remote culture, and I would challenge anybody with an office to have that good of a culture.
I love that. I can't tell you how many times I get asked when I'm, going to on a panel at a conference or whatever it is, and you probably get this a lot too. And it happened more so at the beginning of the pandemic. I think it's chilled out a little bit, but there were so many questions about how do you maintain and build culture when people are remote? How do you maintain it? And it's like culture's never
Yeah,
been about a building. Like we've always been a remote workforce, even before the pandemic. We were using Zoom and Slack long before. Like, well, this is no big deal. We do this every day anyway, right? But
yeah.
yeah, it's culture is it's the underlying mindset and attitude and values, and how you connect with people, and that that doesn't matter whether you are, whether you're in person or not. But I do think I love how you're approaching it, because you do have to have a little bit more intentionality in terms of the practices, because you can't just run into somebody. But beyond that, though, I think, I agree. Like, I have built some of the greatest relationships, and then, like, I feel like they're one of my greatest friends, and then you realize, like, 3 years later, you're meeting them for the first time in person. I'm like, "God, is this the first time I'm seriously meeting you in person?" And you're like, "How is that possible?" Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I love all of that. So what it one of the other things besides the build a lighthouse principle that we talk about, that I know there's synergy, is one of our rehumanizing principles is, we're working with clients, we always talk about we have to wait in the messy middle. Like, I would love to tell you that there's a fast forward button, there's an easy button, but we all know the reality is that growth does not happen in our comfort zone, and it's messy, and it's just gnarly. And you talk about, as you've had a lot of growth in a very short period of time, that there's been some messy middle that you're wading through too. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been navigating the messy middle, and any lessons learned as a result?
It's funny. This is a passion project of mine, and I do a podcast, and it's a lot of it's called about the messy middle, because I think in startups there are three general phases. There's the, like, I have an idea and I started a business, and then at some point you have this, like, oh shit, I have to build a real company, and the people that rebel against processes, like me, have to then put in processes and HR and leveling and all that fun stuff that I'm glad we have and other people do. And then you get the corporate side. For us, we have struggled with that. but we reached a really good point when I looked and I said, you know what? It's time for me to hire people that are way better than me. And part of that was I hired a COO, Michael, and he's been the CEO at multiple companies. And my investors looked and they said, are you sure you want to bring a former CEO in? Like, you don't think he's going to want your job? And I'm like, look, if he earns my job, that's cool. And quite frankly, I'd love to take a vacation at some point that didn't involve a phone and a computer. Yeah. But for him, he wanted to like really help run a company, but not have the board and the strategy and like the full weight of it. And he's a process person. He's helped put in those systems, and now he oversees HR and finance. And like we say that like it's his job to run the business, my job to run the company, and my co-founder Jacob's job to run the like overall kind of high level strategy and systems. And so we've all created this really great place for ourselves to be. And part of it was looking at me and saying, it's time for me to hire people that are way better and way different than I am. And that was a huge launching point for the business 2 years ago when we brought him in. And it's what has allowed us to reach scale phases in a really good people way, but also profitability and just the ability to, our goal is to triple over the next 2 years. And in order to do that, we need to have a good, solid foundation. And I love talking about culture. If you only have a good culture, you will fail at scaling. You have to have those systems. You have to have the processes. The other thing that I talk to a lot of CEOs about is I think in my job as a CEO, there are three things that you need to be really successful. You need to be able to focus on your mental and physical health, whatever that means for you. I think that you need to have a peer group of people that are doing something similar where you can talk honestly and listen honestly. And then I think you should have a paid coach. And I think those three things, when I really got all three for myself, is when Decimal started leveling up because it allowed me to level up. And so finding a really good coach, and I've got an amazing one, has been a very helpful thing for me too.
I I love that. And I would say that because we work with not just CEOs, we work with a lot of leadership teams. I think that that goes for leaders at other, regardless of the organization, because of the responsibility.
I agree.
You have. And yeah, and it's interesting because as you're saying, I was thinking about one of the executives of one of our clients. I'm doing both like group team based stuff with that team for organizational health and team health and whatnot. And I'm doing individual coaching with, the leaders. So we're always very clear about this stays here, et cetera. And what's so fascinating is with one of them, when you talk about tending to your own well-being and, what do you need? And like saying, oh, you're more introverted and hey, I need this. One of the executives that I'm working with right now has talked about, we have an exercise of like ingredients to be your best and who are you at your best and what increases the likelihood that that version of you can show up. And I gave him that and he started realizing, that if he's in back to back to backs, he starts, the version of him that he doesn't like so well starts coming out like mid to late afternoon. And that, especially if he has like a really important meeting in front of 1,000 employees, that he's like, I have to have like a half hour ahead of time to just like nothing on my calendar to just
Yeah.
decompress. And he even jokes like, he's like, I might even go out to my car and take a short nap, but it's like he needs like a reboot. It's like your computer. And he started to realize that that's not a bad thing. That's who I needed. When I do that, I show up authentically, I show up transparently, I show up as the best version of me. And when I don't, I show up cranky, jumping in, righteous, not listening to people. And it's just because I don't, it's like, it's like your energy is completely depleted. So I love all of that. And I think that, plug for coaching, like we do that all the time, but we also do other development. But I think it's true because I mean, every good coach also has a coach.
Yeah.
It's just the reality.
Well, 100%. I love remote work. It is perfect for me as a person, and I think it's perfect for our company. There's one thing that I really miss about working in an office: the drive to work and the drive home. The decompression between work and life and home. It's all life. Work and home was really helpful for me as a person. I've had to learn, and learning it during the pandemic was especially interesting, how to like personally mimic that decompression time before jumping off.
Yeah. I think that's great. Yeah, because those boundaries do get blurred, and you just kind of jump in like, oh
Oh,
wait,
yeah.
we gotta have some kind of like this part ends or this part I can like right whatever that is,
Yeah.
and perfect, perfect.
Especially with 3 kids. I am a glorified unpaid Uber driver once the clock at decimal turns off.
That's for sure. I love it. But you're also the superhero who charges across the lawn and helps others.
I will get that for a day and I'm going to live off of it. I got my Captain America shirt for when they get home. It's going to be great.
Oh my god, it's so fantastic. I love this so much. Well, Matt, so speaking of, waiting in the messy middle and the whole messiness of being human, one of the things that I am kind of obsessed with is normalizing that messiness because I do think because I think, we can get in our own head and feel like, oh, it's just us and other people don't struggle with it, which is why I love your idea of having a peer group and, that you're sharing failures and all of this transparency because when we realize, oh, this is a normal human experience. It's not because I'm a flawed, screwed up human being. It makes a difference. So, with that as background, what I would love if you would be willing to share, Matt, is what is a self limiting story that you still tell yourself sometimes? And when it shows up, how do you move beyond it so that you can still show up as a leader in your life?
I think everybody struggles with their own imposter syndrome. And there are days that I wake up and I think, how in the hell am I running an 82-person company? And when did this happen? And can I do it? Am I going to uh, do it well enough for it to be successful how we want it to be successful? I mean, that's I wouldn't say totally daily experience, but it's a multiple time a week experience for me. And I enjoy it. And for me, it's just a drive. I've hit rock bottom. When you fail at a company and you tied your identity to that, one of the greatest things I learned from failing was to untie my identity from work. And now I look and I say, you know what? We got this. I've got a great team. We can do this. I am beneficial to this team, and we're going to keep going. And some days, as an entrepreneur, you get knocked on your ass, and the only thing you can do is stand up. That my kids will joke, and at this point, it's just ingrained in them. We taught them at a young age: when you fall, what do? Get back up. They'll fall on their bike, they'll fall skateboarding, they'll fall doing whatever. And my kids and I, they'll just look at me and say, "I'm getting back up." And now it's an eye roll and they're not as cute when they do it. But like it's the same for us in business is some days just get back up.
I love that. Yeah, I call it the roller coaster, riding riding the roller coaster, right? So
Oh yeah. I mean, I joke with people. I mean, and you've been this way. Like, I'll go to dinners with our friends and they're lawyers and investment bankers or whatever, and they're all like, "I'm going to start a company. I'm going to be great at this. Like, it's awesome. Starting a business is amazing." And I'm like, "Okay, sure. You want to know what my day is? My day is like getting punched in the gut 9 times, and maybe once a week something amazing happens that keeps me going. I love it. I'm addicted to it. But you want to know what running a business is? It is like 9/10 terrible and 1/10 amazing. That 1/10, if you're addicted to it, will keep you going for the
yep.
rest of your life."
Yep. I love that. Boom, you have all these bruises. What's happening? All right. All right. Matt, are you ready for quick questions?
Yep. Fire away.
All right. Fill in the blank. Living authentically is.
Showing up every day as who you are and not hiding it.
Love that. When the world is presenting an opening, but you don't feel like showing up as a leader, what do you do?
Jump. I just jump in.
Nice. I thought you were going to say get up anyway. Jump, get up.
No, jump.
That's awesome. With your cape, by the way.
Yep. I used to skydive before I got married, and so I just jump.
Oh, there you go. There you go. All right. What is something people would be surprised to know about you?
I'll go back to I'm an introvert. Most people think that that's absolutely shocking.
Right. Because if you're talkative, you must not be, right?
Right.
All right. What's your favorite go to movie?
Sandlot. Love it. Baseball is the greatest sport God ever invented, and it's funny, and my kids like it.
That's awesome. God, it's been forever since I've seen that one. I'm going to have to pull that one back out. All right. What's your go to song?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. Go to song right now. We'll go with Born to Be Wild. Got a Steppenwolf tape first time I ever got a car because it had a tape deck. That's how old I am. And Born to Be Wild just goes through my head all the time.
That is awesome. That is awesome. What is something you can't live without?
My family.
Love that. What is something in your ordinary daily life that makes your heart happy?
I get an hour and a half before everybody wakes up to work out and meditate. And that is what keeps me happy and healthy and going.
That's awesome. Self-care mornings. That's fantastic. And what are you grateful for right now?
I've got an awesome team. I am grateful to come into work to amazing people that enjoy their job and the people they work with and do a good job. And that makes coming to work fun,
That's awesome.
even when there's a dumpster fire around every corner.
You know what? And that's the work. That's the world that we envision and want to create for others. So I love that. I love that you get that. All right, one final question, Matt. If you could challenge leaders everywhere to practice this one behavior that would create more human workplaces and equip everyone to show up as a leader, what would that be?
Ask people how they're doing and mean it multiple times a day. If you do that, they will do the same thing and you will develop an empathetic and authentic culture.
So simple, yet so powerful. I love that so much. Well, Matt, this has been such a pleasure. I could, have a geek out session with you any day of the week. And I love how you're taking all the past lessons. I love how deliberate you're being in growing and scaling your company and the success you're having as a result. So just thank you for modeling it. Thank you for sharing it. And thank you for being you in this conversation.
Well, I really appreciate the time and I love talking about this stuff. So thank you very much.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.